The Powerpuff Girls is one of the best Cartoon Network shows of all time. And that's saying something considering all of the incredible series that have aired on Cartoon Network, especially during the 90s and early 2000s. But there's a certain charm to the original Powerpuff Girls that made it really likable, entertaining, and insanely popular with all types of audiences, since the show's combination of clever comedy and genuinely awesome action made it enjoyable for both young kids and adults alike. Although, originally, the show could have been even less appropriate for kids if some of the initial concepts had gone through. For example, did you know that the Powerpuff Girls' original name was actually the Whoop-Ass Girls?
But Professor Utonium accidentally added a can of Whoop-Ass to the concoction. Thus, the Whoop-Ass Girls were born.
This is the original student animation that series creator Craig McCracken made while he was studying at Cal Arts, long before the concept would be picked up for a full series. And there are many other early designs, cancelled episodes, even cancelled crossovers, and a number of unused ideas that were rejected for different reasons, such as not being able to use certain words, like whoop-ass, or for example him. Him was one of the most iconic and genuinely dark villains from the show, but he could have been an even darker character, since originally they straight up wanted to call him the devil.
Oh my god, look! It's the devil!
I'll take that key to the well.
As mentioned previously, the Powerpuff Girls as a concept was created by Craig McCracken, an incredibly talented animator and cartoonist with an impeccable style, who's responsible for creating many amazing cartoons. Besides the Powerpuff Girls, he also created Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Wander Over Yonder, and Kid Cosmic, which are all fantastic shows. But before all of that incredible work, Craig McCracken began as a young fan of animation that started drawing and making art from an early age, who eventually went on to formally study animation at Cal Arts during the early 90s, a place where he would meet a lot of friends and future collaborators in the industry like Gendy Tartakovsky, Paul Rudish, and Rob Renzetti. During his first year at Cal Arts, McCracken created his first student animated short called No Neck Joe, a pretty funny concept about a kid with no neck who gets made fun of, you know, because he has no neck. And right from the start, we can see Craig McCracken's familiar style that took heavy inspiration from the UPA animation style, a minimalist, heavily two-dimensional art style with a focus on geometric shapes and bold colors that was widely used throughout animated TV shows during the 1950s and 60s. It's a style that went on to inspire the look of many 90s and 2000s cartoons, and the Powerpuff Girls was one of them. As mentioned previously, the Powerpuff Girls were originally called the Whoop-Ass Girls, and they made their first appearance in Craig McCracken's second student short in his second year of college, although at first, he had actually considered using a luchador superhero called El Fuego as the main character for the short. But before deciding on this, for his brother's birthday, McCracken thought of making a drawing on a birthday card for him, and he made a little sketch of 3 girls with really big eyes, inspired by the paintings of Margaret Keane, and he decided to use these characters as the stars of his new cartoon.
And I ended up giving this to my brother for his birthday instead of a card, and originally I was going to cast El Fuego, the Mexican wrestler, but as soon as I drew these girls, I went, forget about the Mexican wrestler guy, what if I put these 3 little girls in?
The short focused on the Whoop-Ass Girls stopping the Amoeba Gang from committing crimes, and they do so by grabbing them and literally burning them on the surface of the sun. Again, the girls were kinda pretty hardcore originally. A fun fact about this short is that Craig McCracken actually wanted to create 4 Whoop-Ass Stew shorts in total, and he did actively work on them, but he only managed to fully finish 1 short, and 3 other Whoop-Ass Stew shorts were storyboarded but left unfinished. The first one was a short titled Whoop-Ass A Go-Go, and it was about the Whoop-Ass Girls having to race against an early version of him, who, as we've mentioned before, was actually meant to be called the Devil, and the concept of the girls racing against their villains was later reused in the episode The Powerpuff Girls Rule. The second unfinished short was titled Monkey See, Doggy Do, and it was about Mojo Jojo turning the Whoop-Ass Girls into dogs, and it's nice to see the original design for Mojo Jojo.
Oh no, he's turned them into dogs!
And now to conquer the world! Ouch!
Yeah, go get 'em, Whoop-Ass dogs!
This idea, of course, would later be used on the show as an episode with the same name. The third and final unfinished short was called Monster Trouble, and it focused on Townsville being attacked by a giant kaiju and the girls fighting it as Dynamo. This basic premise was later reused on the final show as the episode Uh-Oh Dynamo, but a fun detail from the short is that there, the girls sort of fused together in order to transform into Dynamo, kinda as if it were a superpower, independent of technology. McCracken only ended up fully animating, coloring, and finishing one Whip-Ass 2 short, The Whip-Ass Girls in a Sticky Situation, and released it in 1992 as his second student film. And by way of his college professor, it ended up being shown to Linda Seminsky, who at the time was working for Nickelodeon as a network executive. She thought that the Whip-Ass 2 short was incredibly well made with a lot of potential for a series, but unfortunately, the Whip-Ass Girls didn't really align with Nickelodeon's direction at the time and wasn't really what they were looking for. Seminsky would later leave Nickelodeon to work on the Cartoon Network, and she would support the show in getting made, but that would happen years later. At that time, however, after CalArts, Craig McCracken would go on to work for Hanna-Barbera on the show Two Stupid Dogs. Later in his career, around 1993, Fred Sieber, who was president of Hanna-Barbera at the time, saw his OG Whip-Ass 2 college short, and they wanted to pick up the series as a full show. They originally discussed in making a full 13-episode season, but there were later some executive changes at Cartoon Network, and McCracken was informed that instead of getting a full 13-episode season right away, they would instead be making Whip-Ass Girls shorts for their new What a Cartoon program. Although the name of Whip-Ass Girls would have to be changed for kind of obvious reasons. You couldn't really market to children a show with ass on its title back then. I don't even think you could do it right now. But due to this, they were obligated to change the name, and after considering many different titles for the girls and the show, they decided on the Powerpuff Girls and made 2 What a Cartoon shorts. Now, Craig McCracken kind of panicked after the first What a Cartoon short was focus tested and shown to some kids, and some of them complained about the girls' weird bug-eyed designs and them having no fingers, so he rushed to redesign the girls with more traditional facial features, different hairstyles, and hands. Although in the end, he still decided to use his original big-eyed designs for the final show, and the redesigned, more normal-looking Powerpuff Girls ended up being reused in the episode Oops, I Did It Again. The What a Cartoon shorts were made in 1995, but even though they did consider Greenlight and Powerpuff Girls for a full series at the time, out of all of the shorts in the original What a Cartoon program, Dexter's Lab ended up being the first concept that they greenlit for a full series, and the Powerpuff Girls would eventually be greenlit as well, finally premiering on Cartoon Network on 1998. And to say that the show was a success would be a massive understatement, since it kind of became the flagship show of Cartoon Network for a time. It managed to genuinely entertain a lot of different audiences and demographics. Not only did both boys and girls enjoy the show, but it was also a success with young adults and some older audiences, and that's because there's a lot of different things to enjoy on the show. Its action is genuinely engaging and kinda brutal with all the blood, but the series was also immensely charming and really funny. They managed to make a creative new concept out of many familiar inspirations. Its UPA animation plays with the style of familiar 50s and 60s cartoons, but it also mixes a lot of superhero tropes, anime references, and many different pop culture sensibilities, which all greatly added onto the show's personality, and it created a new recognizable identity of its own. But would you be surprised if I told you that Batman is actually the biggest influence on the show?
Billy do everything for Powerpuff Girls.
What? Cool, a butler. Girls, he's one of the Gangrene Gang.
Aw, but he wants to thank us for saving his life.
And Batman has a butler.
More specifically, the 60s Adam West Batman TV show was the biggest influence on the series. This is something that Craig McCracken himself confirmed on Twitter a few years back. When you watch the series, it is kind of apparent if you're familiar with both shows. Because while the Powerpuff Girls did reference a lot of stuff from the general comic book medium, like the Super Friends or Justice League, or that episode that Buttercup basically turned into Spawn, but overall, the 60s Batman TV show in particular was the most notorious inspiration throughout. The Powerpuff Girls intro with them fighting their villains is very similar to the 60s Batman intro, and during the series run, there were many different references and Easter eggs to Batman, like the phone that the mayor uses to call the girls, or different random jokes that they made in many episodes.
We're superheroes.
We were born with superpowers.
You can't just buy superpowers.
Oh, yeah? Tell that to Batman.
Another fun fact about Batman and the Powerpuff Girls is that they kind of almost had a crossover episode. Years back on Craig McCracken's Tumblr, he confirmed that the planned episode involved the Joker visiting Townsville to cause crimes, and the mayor actually getting excited about the fact that a famous supervillain was visiting his city, so he would try to stop the girls from trying to beat up the Joker. They also wanted to use the designs from Batman the Animated Series, and as such, they wanted Mark Hamill to come on the show to reprise his role as Joker. But unfortunately, Warner Brothers rejected the idea, and man, that sucks, because the concept of a crossover between the original Powerpuff Girls and the DCAU sounds legitimately insane to me, but in a good way. DC did publish the Powerpuff Girls tie-in comic books, and technically, the Powerpuff Girls did cross over with DC in an old promotional bumper on Cartoon Network.
Destroy them!
Another rumored planned episode that they had considered for the show was a concept titled Deja Vu. This is a storyline that was adapted in the 50th issue of the Powerpuff Girls comic, but allegedly, the idea was originally meant to be an episode of season 4 of the show. The story revolves around the Powerpuff Girls being transported to an alternate universe where they have to fight against evil versions of themselves, called the Powerpunk Girls, and Oppressor Plutonium. The Powerpuff Girls would also team up with a heroic Mojo Jojo in order to stop them. And if you'd like to hear more about the cancelled episode, I suggest you check out the video that YouTuber Childish Juju made on the subject, since it's very good and breaks down the planned story detailed in the comic. Next, I'd like to talk about not a rejected episode, but a censored episode. I'm talking about See Me, Feel Me, Know Me, which is infamous for having been banned from airing on Cartoon Network for years after it was made because, allegedly, there's a scene in the episode where some network executives thought that the metal beams of some of the buildings looked too similar to crosses, and that a background character also looked like Jesus. What? That really was the reason why the episode was banned for years, according to many of the show's crew. But eventually, with time, the episode was aired on television after the controversy. Another fun fact about the musical episode is that Jack Black was approached in order to play the gnome, but he apparently turned down the role. Speaking of musical facts about the show, did you know that the band Gorillaz almost made a song for the Powerpuff Girls movie? Craig McCracken himself wanted it to happen, but due to scheduling conflicts, it couldn't materialize, although there were a couple of Gorillaz Easter eggs during the Powerpuff Girls movie as a result. And years later, in 2018, while Gorillaz was rolling out their 6th studio album, The Now Now, they introduced Ace as the new bassist of the group, and that is actually supposed to be the same Ace from the Gangrene Gang. It's kinda crazy to think that the relationship between the Powerpuff Girls and Gorillaz goes so far back. Regarding the Powerpuff Girls movie, originally, they thought of making the plot of the film about the villains from the show arguing and fighting each other over control of Townsville, but this was discarded since they thought that it would leave too little screen time for the girls, so they decided on making the movie an origin story explaining the background behind the characters and give general audiences a story that would make them connect with the girls more. And a more controversial choice from its production is that the movie ended up being kind of dark. A choice that kind of ended up hurting it, since it sadly underperformed at the box office, despite being a good movie. It's just that it wasn't what most people was expecting from a Powerpuff Girls movie, and before its release, Cartoon Network was actually considering on making more big-budget feature films to release in theaters, for shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy, Codename Kids Next Door, and Samurai Jack. But unfortunately, the Powerpuff Girls movie's poor performance at the box office put an end to those plans. Ultimately though, the Powerpuff Girls would run for 6 seasons from 1998 until 2005, after years of being one of the flagship shows of Cartoon Network, and it managed to live on well beyond the original show's end, since the cartoon has been revived multiple times, like in the Japanese anime spin-off Powerpuff Girls Z, and the 2014 special revival Powerpuff Girls Dance Pants, which featured a new art style and also Ringo Starr. And in 2016, they decided to actually go ahead and make a reboot of the franchise. A horrible, god-awful, soul-crushing reboot. But wait, that wasn't the only horrible, soul-crushing reboot of the Powerpuff Girls that's been attempted. since as some of you might know, a few years back, the CW was actually developing a new live-action reboot of the Powerpuff Girls, which was gonna be a superhero teen drama, similar to other shows on the network, and my god, it looked like absolute dog shit. It would have starred Chloe Bennett as Blossom, Dove Cameron as Bubbles, Yana Peralta as Buttercup, and Donald Faison as the Professor, and screenwriter Diablo Cody was working on developing the series, which was gonna apparently show the Powerpuff Girls as disillusioned 20-somethings that resented their careers as child superheroes. And just by the sound and general look of things, it was gonna most likely be yet another uninspired adult reboot of an old beloved kids franchise. So yeah, we kinda dodged a bullet with that one. Currently though, as of me making this video, the last big news we've gotten on the Powerpuff Girls is that Craig McCracken himself is working with Warner Brothers to make a new reboot series, and considering that it's being made by the original creator, I genuinely hope that the new show can live up to the amazing quality of the 90s cartoon that we all loved so much while growing up. I'm definitely curious to see what this new reboot will look like, but I'm also a bit jaded and worried if I'm being honest, considering the current state of Warner Brothers Discovery and Cartoon Network, especially after the building for Cartoon Network Studios was abandoned by the company this year after undergoing a huge downsizing within the company, with a large amount of layoffs and many animators being left out of a job. It's definitely a really unfortunate situation that has been highlighted by the hashtag RIP Cartoon Network, which tries to bring awareness to the current state of the animation industry. I honestly hope that employment conditions for animators get better, and that they're able to negotiate a fair treatment and better compensation for their amazing work. And I also wish that Warner Brothers Discovery stops abruptly canceling and shelving projects without much reasoning, and that shows like the upcoming Powerpuff Girls reboot, led by McCracken, are able to be produced and released without any major issues. Still though, what do you think? Are you also excited for the new Powerpuff Girls reboot being worked on by Craig McCracken? And what do you think about the original series and its early designs and ideas? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.